Good afternoon, everybody. A very happy Sunday to you all. Ever so sorry about that. Looks like YouTube deleted my former stream for some reason. Not sure what happened there. But I would be very happy if you could let me know you could hear me okay. That's the first thing to get sorted. How are you all today? Hello, hello. Hi, chat. Some funny comments coming through already. All right, let me know. You can hear me, yeah? Am I crystal clear? Awesome. Okay, amazing. Right. I have a banging show for you today because we are talking Friedrich Nietzsche. I know it's a bit of a drizzly day outside. You're probably thinking, do I really want to tune in to an intense afternoon of German philosophy in my downtime on my day off? The answer is, of course, yes. That is because Nietzsche has the answers to the crisis of our time, ladies and gentlemen. All the way back in 1866, I'm going to tell you what he said. He wrote, "There is nowadays, throughout almost the whole of Europe, a sickly irritability and a repulsive effeminizing, which seeks to deck itself out as something superior. There is a regular cult of suffering, and it disgusts me." Well, who hasn't shared this sentiment in current year? So let's see if we can extract some wisdom and advice of value. Now, you're very welcome to ask some questions. Let me just see how this works in entropy. Let's have a little look. Okay, URL. Let's have a look. See what we can do. Hi, chat. Oh, must be DLive. I'll check it out in a second, I guess. Hang on. Entropy always stumps me a little bit. All right, I guess I'll come back to that in a second. Entropy stream. Oh, I see what you do. Sorry, folks. Let's see. All right, channel settings. There it is, folks. Hit me up with your questions, okay? I'm all yours today. Oh, someone said entropy rules the universe. Hey, it's not so bad as YouTube though, right? Okay. Now, Nietzsche is a difficult philosopher to read. He's not easy to get into. But this is not because his ideas are reserved for only a special high IQ breed, okay? You will find quite a bit of arrogance and intellectual snobbery in circles that like to laud the big thinkers. And that grates on me because I don't like to see people disheartened from material that could make a difference to their life. And I want to stress this because a lot of people walk away from Nietzsche assuming that they're not cut out for this material, that it's too enigmatic, too obscure, and ultimately has little to offer by way of practical relevance for them, and for their day-to-day lives. So the intention today is just to give you a bit of confidence, give you a bit of courage, and help you find that straightforward entry point into these juicy gems buried under the masses of scholarship. As Nietzsche says, they muddy the waters to make them seem deep. The last thing I want to do is go too heavy for you on a Sunday, so it'll probably just be an hour stream, just seeing how we go, because I don't want to lay it on too thick. Anyway, Nietzsche, German philosopher, of course, born 1844 into a strictly Lutheran family. An exceedingly clever young man. Okay, it's really intensely difficult to comprehend the smarts on this guy. I think to this day, my understanding is that he holds the record for Europe's youngest ever full professor, narrowly beating, I think it's our own Enoch Powell, actually. And he didn't even have to finish his doctorate. They simply fast-tracked him to the faculty where he began teaching classics and philology as a full professor straight away. So incredibly sharp young man. Now, he was, of course, German, but this, his work is highly influenced by the English canon. I know that I saw some people in chat already giving me a bit of jeer about all this German centricism. Well, all right, let's just be patient and I'll see what I can do for you, deliver for you on the English front. Zarathustra is actually based on Lord Byron's play Manfred, and a great many lines in Nietzsche's text trace back to our very own poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Now, this is relevant because it puts Nietzsche very much in the realm of romantic. So I obviously don't mean romantic as in romance, hearts and flowers, but romantic with a capital R. So the early Sturm und Drang movement, you've got your Goethes and your Schillers, and that's something to keep in mind. As soon as you place him in that school of thought, a great deal of imagery and metaphor will become easier to comprehend. All right, hang on, let's see. Is entropy working? Yes, you're quite right, Betwixt. It was a lot to do with Nietzsche's sister. I'm glad you mentioned that. We can get into that for sure. So I'm just going to check entropy's working. Let me see. Man, this is so confusing. What is wrong with me? Update default card. Okay. Not working. Few seconds, guys. Entropy Live. What are you all up to today anyway? Having a good Sunday? It's very rainy outside up my way. Huh. Okay, entropy is actually working. It just says that I'm offline, but I can actually see what you're doing. So sorry about that. I don't know how this happened before for me on the Trafalgar stream, but I can actually see. Thank you, Dangerfield. I'm giving you such a hard time today, helping me out. But that's amazing. So get your questions in, folks, because I want to grapple with them. Give me what you got. All right. In terms of questions, that is, by the way. So in part, so we talked about it, Nietzsche, he is obviously he's really quite a romantic. So in part, this is because he lived for so many years in Switzerland. It was Basel University he was teaching at. And so the landscape there formed a great deal of the backdrop of his thought. And in his work, you'll find a great many references to mountains, to alpine glaciers, nomadic wanderers and climbers. And that's because he went to the Alps to try and improve his health. Nietzsche was actually a very sickly man. And from his youth, he was afflicted by all number of chronic pains and ailments, which I think in part answers probably for his commitment to dedicating a treatise to the strong man, the man of will and self-overcoming, which is of course Übermensch, which we'll get to. I'm sure somebody will ask at some point whether or not it's true he had syphilis. The answer is we don't actually know. He had a falling out with his very good friend till that point, Richard Wagner, who did spread some very malicious rumors about him, and he in turn as well. It's probably most likely that it was a mixture, either of syphilis or some kind of brain cancer in the end. But we don't necessarily know. His sister did burn a lot of his works, probably for some of the more naughty things he was up to. So we're going to address another elephant in the room here, which is that Nietzsche is very often accused of being a darling of the far right. Now, obviously, if you're already subscribed to my channel, I doubt that means much to you or you're terribly bothered about it. I personally don't care if that's true. But really what bothers me is that, in other words, the insinuation is that there is something debased and nefarious about his thought, and by transition about those who read and enjoy him. I know that several years ago at UCL, there was a Nietzsche reading club, which I believe was actually banned because they put up posters with one of his quotes that read, "Equality is a false god," and this ruffled quite a few tail feathers. Now, it is true his books were issued in the World War I trenches. He was in his own dedicated issue of Der Stürmer magazine. His sister was married to a man called Alfred Baumer, who became a prominent National Socialist. He was a fellow actually who tried to set up an independent colony, a German colony in Paraguay. Ben McIntyre actually has quite a good book on this called The Forgotten Fatherland, if you're interested. So there are links there. Hitler obviously very famously carried Nietzsche's walking stick. If you've ever seen pictures of Hitler toward the end of the war, from what I understand, he had early was it maybe Parkinson's? I might be wrong on that, but he's carrying Nietzsche's walking stick given to him by Nietzsche's sister. He also had a very high-profile friendship with Richard Wagner. He was, of course, a kind of official Reich composer. Now, the only reason I point these out, I say these as points of interest, is, I guess, because establishing the context of this crossover can prove, for a lot of people, a really decisive factor in whether they, as readers, pursue his texts sometimes with renewed excitement and eagerness, or they drop their former interests in disgust. And what I found is that this repeats itself as a point of just relentless focus, relentless fixation, grievance, concern. I'm just looking at your comments. Some of them are making me laugh. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I don't know why entropy's showing offline. It's done that before to me. Maybe I'll have to hit them up at some point. You know, maybe I'll have to give them a shout. But anyway, I can still see your questions, so that's awesome, and I will get to those. So what were we talking about? We talked about Switzerland. So today, yeah, what I want to basically, don't be put off by that was my only point. We will get into some of the things that he spoke about. There is a lot of evocative imagery in Nietzsche. It is true to say that some of it is quite anti-Semitic. In the modern parlance, it probably would meet that standard. There's a little bit of lightweight casual misogyny going on in there, a little bit of lightweight casual sort of ethnocentrism. I'm obviously not condoning that, but it is there, but probably not to the extent that people would, I think, angst about. Now, the two books we're going to discuss today, primarily his most important, Beyond Good and Evil, and the second of which is the Genealogy of Morality, which was a kind of supplement. It was designed to be a supplement to Beyond Good and Evil. Now, there are a number of books I really could have started with. He has around 14, not to mention numerous essays and letters. The two I've mentioned aren't actually Nietzsche's first publications, but they are his most seminal. These are the big two, okay? If you're going to know anything about old Fritz, you can't do away with these two. These are the two that really made a name for him and elevated him from humble scholar to historic Leviathan. Now, a lot of people will find that when they go to buy a Nietzsche text for the first time, in stock most often in bookshops, you'll find it's Zarathustra, which is very peculiar to me. Zarathustra is essentially a kind of poetic, abstract form of blank verse. It's a little bit like if somebody refers to somebody as Zarathustra, it's like you would use the term Faustian. Okay, it's a kind of character. But it's hard to really understand the Zarathustra text until you've read all the other books. So I'd actually leave that till much later on, even though it's most readily available. And people find it maybe less intimidating because it's shorter. Now, Nietzsche belongs to a school of philosophy, which is known as existentialism. Existentialism, it's a bit of a pretentious, lofty term that's given posthumously to an era of thinkers who are beginning to perceive the consequences of a godless world and the state of man and his mental health and well-being in that world. So obviously Nietzsche is writing, he's born in 1844, he's writing sort of late 1860s, 70s and 80s. So he's right on the precipice between antiquity and what we call modernity. So this is the kind of the precipice of the relevance of God is beginning to wane. It's seeing a seismic tapering off, and what's left, or what is going to be imminently left, Nietzsche and the other existentialists they get this sense that there is this awful period of dismal confusion, and this is generally referred to as angst. Okay, that really lovely German word, die Angst, really nice, kind of strong, pleasurable word to say. So you find the likes of Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, Franz Kafka, Dostoevsky. They're all writing about the absurd, all these really stunning but very intensely dark books being penned about lost souls in a state of near perpetual breakdown, some real works of literary genius, actually. And something like Sartre's Nausea is a very good example or introduction if that's the kind of thing you'd be interested to look at. They're asking how we grapple with meaning in an absurd and godless chaos. So meaning has now been called into question with the death of God. That's what Nietzsche meant when he said that God is dead. And that's a phrase that's often misinterpreted as a declaration of joy and pride. Actually, Nietzsche was really deeply disturbed and deeply troubled by it. He said God is dead and we have killed him. How shall we console ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? So we are at a juncture, essentially, which threatens everything. Everything that man is used to habitually is petering out, and with it, the question of purpose. So purpose is a massive part of existentialism, so keep that in mind. And this is one of the reasons I like Nietzsche so much. There is an extraordinary sense of moving forward. His work is all about active, pragmatic agency in the present, as a necessary condition for a prosperous future. So I always found that people will often say, well, Nietzsche's for, I saw someone in chat say, oh, it's just for teenage boys. I think one of the reasons it does appeal to teenagers, because it did to me at that age, was, although he's quite an old philosopher now, he gives you this extraordinary sense of active purpose. It's something that can be tangibly applied to life, and that's what I really like about him. Now, in many ways, he's not a great philosopher if you're interested in nationalism, like most of us are, because he's very much self-orientated. It's about changing the mentality of oneself. He's not necessarily an individualist, but a great deal of his work is about he was a very solitary man, quite nomadic in his lifestyle. And becoming an Übermensch for him is all about self-empowerment, self-conquering. But I would say that that's probably a necessary precondition or precursor to being a good member of a collective, a healthy one. And that's relevant really to Beyond Good and Evil for this reason. For the reason that the subtitle of the book, Beyond Good and Evil, is a prelude to the philosophy of the future. So a big part of the focus is on the condition of man's health and how he's going to interact with the world, but as a precursor to the future. So that's one of the reasons Nietzsche starts that you should start out with Beyond Good and Evil, because it's a kind of necessary precondition for a future of the higher man, is what he calls it. Let me just have a look at some of your comments. Oh, there's so many of you watching. That's so lovely of you. What are you all doing home on a Sunday, eh? So keep your questions coming in. You're very welcome. I can actually see them. I can see them even if you can't. I don't know why it says it's offline, but yeah, keep them coming. I'm enjoying reading some of them. Let me read some of them now, actually. Dangerfield says test. Hey, man. Bilbo says, hi, I love your channel. Sending love from Czech. Oh, wow, you're so lucky to live there. Do you know Naomi Seip from Germany? I recently recommended your channel to her. She wrote your name down. No, I don't actually, but I will look into her. Thank you very much. Hello, Mr. Red Pill Pharmacist. Entropy is live. Thank you very much. Sense of Communion. Hello. I love the classics, Mind Your Language, and Love Thy Neighbor are two of my all-time favorites. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Thank you. Very good stuff. So one of the reasons Nietzsche can feel like a bit of an incomprehensive, incoherent riddle when you're reading him is that his work is very close to note form. So a lot of what is published now in Nietzsche's name was never actually necessarily intended by him to actually be seen. And when you think about your own notebook, I don't know about you, but mine reads like a madman. A mad woman. It reads like a mad woman even when it's been edited and seen. So in many ways, this is why Nietzsche can be quite incomprehensible at first. It's a little bit like Shakespeare, though. It's got its own reason and rhyme to it. It's like learning a language. The more you read of him and practice, the more the text has its own kind of melody. You start to reckon, oh, that's a very Nietzschean kind of tone or tenor. But Nietzsche is also very playful in the way he writes. He likes to make little dark jokes. He's very melodramatic at times. For instance, he starts his autobiography, Ecce Homo, by saying, I am the most clever man alive and none can compare with me. And some readers take that seriously, but it's sort of banter. He opens Beyond Good and Evil saying, suppose truth were a woman, what then? What he means of that's kind of 19th century German banter. He's sort of saying, women are mystical. There's absolutely no understanding them. There's no logical apparatus that could ever help us to be able to comprehend that. And unless, this is why I'd really recommend having a very good text with an academic Nietzsche text. And I can recommend you some at the end. I'll post them under this stream. But unfortunately, he is one of those philosophers that if you want to read him seriously, you got to get a good edition, a good academic edition, okay, of Nietzsche. Usually Walter Kaufmann or R.J. Hollingdale are the ones you want to look for. Something with footnotes, because it's just peppered with all sorts of little idiosyncrasies from the period that the modern reader wouldn't understand. I certainly wouldn't. And if you don't want to spend your time, constantly stopping and having to research what he means, then get a text with footnotes. For instance, let me give you an example. he often makes this reference to Lessing's son. Now, Lessing was a German philosopher and poet, and at the time, Nietzsche knew Lessing, and his son had famously at the time passed away. He had an infant son who died very young. And so that's what Nietzsche's referring to. He said that we would have every reason to flee as quickly as Lessing's son, who understood the world so well that he left it at the first opportunity. And it's a kind of a repeated phrase throughout his work. He likes to refer to Lessing's son. So it's good to have a good footnote addition, just to help you with those little bits and pieces. He's also a bit of an abstract writer. He'll suddenly burst into song and lyric at times. Not song, but kind of poetic lyric, which is very bizarre. You have to read, in many ways, it's helpful to read him a little bit like you might read James Joyce. I think being German, readers do come with a certain expectation of finding a more German procedure of style. So a really dense methodology, for example, highly detailed, highly polished theses in the style of Kant or Heidegger. But actually that's not so. Nietzsche is actually what you call an aphoristic writer. So aphoristic, or an aphorism, is really a posh way of saying short, sharp, and sweet. His work is typically a collection of concise statements, which published in a single volume. Now, some people misunderstand these as something akin to mini chapters, but they're actually really just fragments strung together in sequences. And these can be anywhere between 2 or 3 lines, or 3 or 4 pages, or paragraphs, or pages. Sometimes the aphorism will lead on to a related train of thought. Other times it will just break entirely and start wholly anew on a completely separate thread. So he's very fragmented. That's why I say you should read him in the way you'd read a poet like James Joyce. It's like an abstract piece of writing in a kind of freestyle, more than a disciplined methodology. And the main reason for this is that he actually had very bad arthritis. He couldn't write for long periods of time. So he'd write in fits and starts. I always like that quote. He's got a quote where he says, when one has much to put into them, a day has 100 pockets. That's how I often think of the day, as having 100 pockets to do little bits and pieces, And so he would rest regularly, and then he'd have another spurt of energy where he'd do what he needed to do. He actually had this really cool writing ball. It's like a typewriter, really early typewriter. If you look it up, it's quite a scary looking object. It's like a brass writing ball, and he would like tap away on that. Actually, it gives you the creeps when you think about it. But he just physically couldn't write for long periods of time, which is why you don't find his work. It's fragmented. It's written in fragments. Sometimes that can be easier to read because it means you can skip to any page of a Nietzsche text, and you won't necessarily have missed anything out. You just go to one of the aphorisms, and it can be like a randomly selected or chosen one. You won't need any context or background for it, pretext from the other books. What it does mean, however, is that you've got to read all the books to get all the threads. So I guess swings and roundabouts. Let's have a look at some of your comments. Oh, someone's mentioned Paul Raya. Okay, so we've got some real Nietzsche fans in text, if you know Paul Raya. Let's have a look. Hi, John Doe. Ramblings of a Madman. Hello. Hi, everybody. James Joyce was influenced by Nietzsche. I didn't know that. Well, that's good to know. I know that Nietzsche was quite influenced by the American poet Emerson, actually. Very nature-based. He liked Coleridge as well, if you can believe. It's quite unusual. Oh, German intellectuals, someone's saying. Well, they're pretty clever. Hi, everybody. So please keep your questions coming. I think I already put the link in the chat, but please keep them coming. You're very welcome to ask. I'll just put it in again. So where are we now? So we talked about his abstract sort of style. Now, okay, I guess we can get into the content of the actual books now. Let's see, what have we got? Just getting the text up here. Now, although Beyond Good and Evil is the primary text we're going to talk about, it's really important to mention his other book, which is The Genealogy of Morality. I actually prefer The Genealogy. It's probably one of the most spectacular books I've ever read, and very unnerving, quite deeply disturbing in many ways. But it's really a phenomenal text. And basically, just as the title says, Nietzsche quite literally is seeking to produce a history of the origins of morality. So literally a genealogy of morals. He wants, this is why he calls himself a genealogist of morals. He wants to know essentially where they came from, how were they settled, how were they decided upon, and why is it we have come to accept them as fixed, binding, and uniformly correct. So it's essentially a study of the long and difficult to decipher, this is what he says, a study of the long and difficult to decipher hieroglyphic writing of the past in human morality. He says, we need a critique of moral values. We must first question the very value of these values. And for that, we need a knowledge of the conditions and circumstances out of which those values grew. I am an opponent of this disgraceful modern effeminacy of feelings. This problem of the value of pity and of the morality of pity, for instance, appears at first to be only something isolated, a detached question mark, but anyone who remains there for a while and learns to ask questions would experience what happened to me. A huge new vista opens up before him. A possibility grips him like an attack of dizziness. All sorts of mistrust, suspicion, and fear spring up. His belief in morality and all morality starts to totter, and finally he hears a new demand. So that's apart from the genealogy. Now let's get back on to Beyond Good and Evil. As I say, it was intended to be a kind of supplement to Beyond Good and Evil, which basically means like kind of edification of, although I actually much prefer it as a text. So Beyond Good and Evil it's basically looking at when did ethics begin and how did they originate? Now, if one has in mind ethics proper, so the systematic study of what is morally right and what is morally wrong, it's clear that ethics could have come into existence only when human beings started to reflect on the best ways to live. Now, Nietzsche is saying, well, hang on a minute. Who decided what was the best way to live and under which guise? This reflective stage emerged long after human societies had developed some kind of morality, usually in the form of customary standards of right and wrong conduct. So the process of reflection for morality tends to arise from, Nietzsche says, sometimes arbitrary customs, which may be continued in use out of habit, and learned behaviors. And so Nietzsche says in Beyond Good and Evil, well, what if we've accepted as morally good, quote unquote good, or quote unquote evil to date? What if those values have actually been quite unhealthy for us? What if they have sustained bad habits and poor social conduct? What if actually various virtues that we have come to take for granted unquestioningly, automatically as positive and quote unquote good, actually are degrading? They degrade and they weaken man rather than strengthening and amplifying him. What if it is life denying as opposed to life affirming? And these are the two terms you really need to know about Nietzsche. He's all about life affirmation. What maximizes life in the here and now? A lot of people talk about Nietzsche as though he was depressing and a nihilist. That's a complete nonsense. He's all about life, maximizing life. Becoming yes men is what he says. And what if, alternatively, in reverse, what if conduct commonly described as evil is actually that which is healthy, natural, and emboldening? So there are certain virtues we have taken for granted as hitherto accepted dogma that actually maybe they disincentivize agency and active movement in the world. So that is what Beyond Good and Evil is all about. Let me read you a little bit from the text. I've got a frog in my throat. Hang on, I'm going to clear it quickly. Okay, I've cleared it. It's just hopped out. Okay. Oh, the stream is moving dead fast. There's so many bunnies in chat. Hey, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, Not So Obvious. How you doing, man? It's been a while. Keep your questions coming, chickens. I'd love to see them. My sweet peas. All right, let's read a bit from Beyond Good and Evil. We have taken the worth of these values, quote unquote values, as something given, as self-evident, as beyond all dispute. Up until now, people have also not had the slightest doubts about or wavered in setting up the good man, quote unquote, as more valuable than the evil man, of higher worth in the sense of the improvement, usefulness, and prosperity with respect to mankind in general, along with the future of humanity. What about this? What if the truth were the other way around? Well, what if in the good there even lay a symptom of regression, something like a danger, a seduction, a poison, a narcotic, something which makes the present live at the cost of the future? Perhaps something more comfortable, less dangerous, but also on a smaller scale, something more demeaning. So that this very morality would be guilty if the inherently possible highest power and magnificence of the human type were never attained. So that this very morality might be the danger of all dangers. So, in other words, he's saying, what if we've actually accepted a bit of a fictitious logic here? We're going to be buggered. What if we've got into the habit of discussing certain quote-unquote virtues as though they were virtues, when actually they really harm us? Well, how many examples can you think of in our day-to-day life? Radical compassion, radical equality. How much does Nietzsche very famously said, equality is a false god, and that is, in my opinion, what he is correct about. The adherence to equality does nothing but degrade us as a society, keeps us stupefied. So Nietzsche says what we need to do is start asking, to what extent is this good, quote unquote good? To what extent is it life-promoting, life-preserving, species-preserving, and perhaps even species-cultivating? Because the value of a thing sometimes doesn't lie in that which one attains by it, but in what one pays for it, what it costs us. And he says, what fruit do such views actually bear when they come to maturity? Well, we can ask ourselves, what fruit has, for instance, liberalism borne? Has it borne a beautiful and flourishing fruit that we are all, keen to feed upon? No. He says, such individuals who espouse them, he says, they level mountain and valley. They call that morality. They make men small, cowardly, and hedonistic. Every time it is the herd animal that triumphs with them. Liberalism, in other words, is herd animalization. Now, this is really part of why Nietzsche calls Christianity a metaphysics of the hangman. Now, I'm a Christian myself. I understand that if you're a nationalist, you're listening to this, it's not easy to always stomach a lot of Nietzsche's critiques of Christianity. But I will, and really the majority of that is found in his other book, The Antichrist, which I'm not really going to talk much about today. We could do another stream on that if people are interested. Nietzsche's problem with Christianity is he never takes issue with people's belief necessarily, or the reality of God. That's never really called into question in any substantial way in Nietzsche. It's not the legitimacy of the divine as an existing spirit or omnipotent presence and divine creator. His objection is to Christianity because as an organized, as an organized system or a process, and the way it's applied through the language usually of the priest, the priestly aristocracy. Nietzsche's problem with Christianity is essentially that it reinforces behaviors that are really detrimental to us. Let me give you an example. Christianity will encourage, as a virtue, something like pity, radical compassion, equality, self-sacrifice, so turning the other cheek. And, what's the famous parable? If a man asks for the coat off your back, you give him not only your coat, but your entire wardrobe, your house, your life savings. This actually really links in with what Way of the World was saying on his, if you watched his video this morning, he's talking about how he was very relevant, how we have become accustomed in the West to this kind of radical compassion, which is actually killing us. And this is really what Nietzsche was saying all the way back in the 1800s is, look at today. We've got churches burning. And what are our priests saying? Oh, I'll go forth with love and forgiveness. And Nietzsche is essentially going, no. He says, look how expensive those virtues are, how much blood and horror is at the bottom of quote unquote good things. In fact, he actually said, and this might be controversial, but again, back in the day, he said, Islam is 1,000 times right in despising Christianity because Islam presupposes men. And actually, that kind of reminds me of Edward Dutton's book. It's called Why Islam Makes You Stupid, but also means you'll dominate the world. I've read it and it's really good. I would really encourage you to pick up a copy. Of course, I'm a Christian. I'm not keen on Islam. But what Nietzsche really was saying is that when he talks about Islam presupposing men, he's talking about man as our animal being with instincts and primitive urges. And Christianity stifles that, is what he was saying at the time. It forces us into a kind of dwarfed, apathetic ghost, if you like. Now, what's really important to remember, and some people can feel very uncomfortable, they read the title Beyond Good and Evil, and they think that Nietzsche is saying, dispense with it, dispense with good, dispense with morality. That's not what he's saying. He's not asking us to overturn or dispense with moral conduct, okay? He's asking us to stop and reassess the values that we have hitherto unquestioningly absorbed as moral because we are told to do so. To ask if they really are, or else if they're nothing more than outdated prejudices recycled through habit from antiquity, an antiquity that no longer suits us in current year. To echo Trudeau. What was I thinking? Hang on a minute. Oh, thank you for your questions. I'm still reading them. I'll keep reading them at the end. If that's okay, my chickens. So, these old virtues, he would say, maybe they don't benefit our modern condition, but actually keep it defiled. So we need to ask if we have in fact been misdirected by what he calls Philistines. And we'll get to the Philistines in a moment, and that's a good fun part. Philistines who are looking to stupefy us, to keep us sick and world-weary. So we need to take pause, to reconsider our moral standard and framework. It's not a question of is it good to be a moral person? Of course it is. It's a question of what we have come to determine as good and what we've come to determine as evil, hence going beyond good and evil, hence the book's title, Beyond Good and Evil. Again, some moron SJW types will always go, oh, beyond good and evil. That means Nietzsche's telling you to dispense with goodness and create your own laws of morality. And that's not very nice and fair. No, he's not, moron. He's not saying that. He's saying transcend those linguistic, and actually this kind of puts Nietzsche on the brink of being a bit of a deconstructionist. He is. But only in the sense that he wants to reaffirm, he wants us to start living in a way that is healthier for us, life-affirming, to have a moral framework? Oh, I heard a little bit my old lisp there, didn't you? A moral framework that is congenial to our senses and tastes, so that we can become once again a culture that owes its origin to instincts rather than to Philistinism. Okay? We need to take pause, reconsider our moral standards, and ultimately to realign them with conduct that breathes energy and strength into life rather than saps it. We need to stop the idolization of what Nietzsche called the weak and the botched. He doesn't mince his words, by the way, ever. Let me tell you what he says. I'll read you a short passage. And by the way, that's really the nexus of Beyond Good and Evil. That's what he's saying. Never forget, Nietzsche was a philologist, okay? So he never studied officially or was never a professor of philosophy. He was a professor of philology. Philology is the study of language, linguistics. That informs so much of what he thinks and feels. Everything he writes about comes from this interest in the mechanics of language. Okay? Let me read you what he says. For me, it was a question of the value of morality. I dealt especially with the value of the unegoistic, the instincts of compassion, self-denial, self-sacrifice, which Schopenhauer is basically one of his favorite, he's like a fanboy, of Schopenhauer, which Schopenhauer had for so long gilded, deified, and transcendentalized until he was finally left with them as those values as such, on the basis of which he said no to life and to himself as well. But against these very instincts, I gave vent to increasingly deep mistrust, a skepticism which dug deeper and deeper. Precisely here I saw the great danger to mankind, its most sublime temptation and seduction. Temptation to what? To nothingness. Precisely here I saw the beginning of the end, standstill, mankind looking back, wearily turning its will against life, and the onset of the final sickness becoming gently, sadly manifest. I understood the morality of compassion, casting around ever wider to catch even philosophers and make them ill, as the most uncanny symptom of our European culture, which has itself become uncanny, as its detour to a new Buddhism, a new Euro-Buddhism, a nihilism. Okay, now when he talks about Buddhism, he's basically, because Buddhism is all about kind of annihilationism and extinguishing self. That's kind of what he's saying. He's saying that actually, in many ways, when we are acting morally in accordance with a framework that has been deified for so long as so-called good, look at the radical compassion. We often hear this phrase, mass immigration, okay? Open borders are good, radical compassion is good. Well, is it not true? I mean, what has been the fruit that has come to bear of that? Total fucking chaos. And that's an obvious example, but it's even classical liberalism. So Nietzsche said, so for me, we read that one, okay. Let me have a little flick through the book. Now, our job, you and I, when we're reading Beyond Good and Evil, as Zarathustrians, okay, basically a Zarathustrian is a character. Zarathustra is a character. Again, I can talk about this on another stream if people are interested. He's a wanderer and a mountain climber, basically like a kind of intellectual nomad. I did see someone in the chat just now again say, well, Nietzsche was a radical individualist. That's actually true. I can't deny that. He's not a collectivist. If you're interested in a philosophy of collectivistness, Heidegger is much better for nationalism. But Nietzsche is very good for self-cultivation, which is one of the reasons I like him very much. It's about working on self in order to become a more productive member of a gathering, which is why I think Nietzsche is a very good precursor to reading Heidegger. So our job as Zarathustrians, and a Zarathustrian, as I said, is somebody who has gone beyond good and evil. By the way, that's what Overman is, Übermensch. Übermensch has been caricatured as this kind of strong Superman. Now, you have to be very careful with translation. Never forget we're reading in translation here. And you've got to be careful with the translation you choose from German. It's much better to read it in the original. I can't do that. It's difficult. I do try, but yes, Übermensch can be translated as Superman, but it's actually better, more accurate in character to call it Overman. The Overman is somebody who has achieved the going beyond good and evil to get a bird's eye perspective. He actually calls those who have not done so people of frog perspectives. There's an old idiom, I guess you'd call it. It's not a haiku, but it's an idiom. I think it's Basho, the Japanese poet. Something like the frog that looks up from the well sees only the sky, but the frog that crawls out of the well sees both the sky and the land. And that's kind of what Nietzsche is saying. So those people are frog people. I'd prefer we were the frog people because I like Pepe, but sadly not. Maybe we're like the Apus, I don't know. And that's what a Zarathustrian is. And this is why he has a lot of this kind of walking, hiking language, looking up into the summit of the glacier, somebody who has climbed to the tallest mountain intellectually, spiritually. So our job is to determine if and where the language of virtue is actually, whether the language of virtue is actually being marshaled against us, and to correct it. How many examples can you think of where we are compelled to act in ways that are quote unquote good? But is that good behavior actually bearing any reasonable fruit for us? Now, this process of correction, ultimately, Nietzsche calls this the transvaluation of all values, okay? Transvaluation of all values. That's the kind of posh way of saying it. It's kind of like take stock and reassess. If anybody knows what I mean by cognitive behavioral therapy, oftentimes they'll tell people who have depression or some such, they talk about automatic thoughts. And the idea is that we intellectually have to try to challenge them by interrupting the automatic pattern of those thoughts and to realign them or redirect them into a more positive sphere. This is kind of what Nietzsche is saying on the societal level. Stop the habit of radical compassion and interrupt it and ask yourself each time, I mean, it's kind of on the boundary of utilitarianism a little bit. To what extent is this life-affirming? The reevaluation of all values, he writes, that is my formula for an act of ultimate self-examination by mankind. Now, Nietzsche is not exhorting us to be ruthless against others, okay? What he's interested in is how much can we prosper. He's interested in prosperity, which is nice. It's nice to have a sense of a more prosperous future. Let me have a little look. 408 watching. Yeah, awesome. Keep your questions coming at me, my chickadees. I'm very excited to read them. Come on, give me your questions. I want to see them. Hit me up. Here's my link. Some of the things you say are dead funny. I'm just laughing. Freud got BTFO'd by CBT. Hello from lockdown in Ireland. Hi, Ireland. Are you locked down as well? Tell you what, it's dead boring, isn't it? Okay, so Bertie Bassett, you've just hit the nail on the head. You've said that he thought of being civilized as somewhat tamed man. Yep, it's absolutely correct. So that's the next part. Next part of the jigsaw puzzle is, what is it? Good question, Sarah. Have I lost my train of thought? This is the will to power. Now, will to power is, you'll find it in Nietzsche, all these little phrases, and they're kind of concept or conceits, basically. So this is the next conceit. It's the will to power. Heraclitus, the Greek, said, all in life is force against force and nothing more. Nietzsche's writing as broadly a contemporary of Darwin. So Darwin's Origin of Species is very much at the forefront of his mind and other minds at the time. So it may seem a bit outdated and obvious now, but at the time this is at the forefront of the world stage. So the death of God, but of course the alternative being Darwin and his theory of evolution. Now, Schopenhauer writes a book, it's called The World as Will and Representation, and in it, Schopenhauer claims that life is all about the instinct to survive. No, says Nietzsche, it's not even survival, it's power. Nietzsche says all at bottom, all we are motivated by is this organic instinct for power. Now, power, to be clear, doesn't necessarily mean the crushing of others, okay? It's quite an evocative term, but it just means anything that it sustains us. It is a will to survival. It's instinctive and primitive. We can't help it, really. And Nietzsche isn't praising this or saying it's good or bad. He's just observing that is one of the key fundamental parts of being human. Now, the will to power being at the bottom of everything we think and everything we do. Oh, have I paused? Have I frozen? I don't know if I have. No, I haven't. Good. Okay. So what did I say? We talked about the will to power, weren't we? Oh, I'm terrible for losing my train of thought. Okay, will to power. There comes a point in human development where man essentially becomes civilized. There has been historically a transition point. Okay, now obviously the way I'm describing this is as a total midwit. You need someone like Edward Dutton to really describe this to you, but you know what I mean by basically the transition point of evolution, where we stop being animals in a kind of wild sense that we're out in the desert fighting each other tooth and nail, and we become sort of more civilized. And this is, this is all part of being human, all too human. However, there still remains within us a fragment of the animal, and that fragment is instincts. And I'm not even talking about, some people think that Nietzsche is saying, well, we just got to return to these animal instincts, because animal instincts are crude, they're quite vulgar, aren't they? They're not necessarily desirable or admirable. It's lust and power and dominion and hunger, and it's brutal. But this is actually not what this is not what's occurring for Nietzsche. What he wants us to pay attention to is how all the base instincts of animosity, of cruelty, the pleasure of pursuing and raiding and destroying that you see in the animal kingdom, because we can see it. You ever watched these nature programs? It is rough out there. Now, all of this is pitted against the person who has such instinct. And Nietzsche says that there is a process of where that is not in society appropriately externalized. It starts to, those instincts don't go anywhere for us as humans. Now, we are a higher type of animal. We're very capable of beauty and creation, and also self-control. And that's a real virtue, is self-control. But what Nietzsche says is that because we are no longer in the desert landscape, he means in the wild, we are lacking external enemies and obstacles out of this kind of civilizing process. So all those instincts actually are subverted elsewhere. And for Nietzsche, he believes that they are subverted in the language of virtue. For instance, if somebody says, take pity on me, everything that the kind of Black Lives Matter movement do, we know that it's nothing to do with justice. It's to do with maximizing and amplifying power. And Nietzsche would say, well, what that is a kind of externalization of the will to power that you would see in the animal kingdom. It's basically, this is a really rudimentary sketch, a blueprint in philosophy terms of game theory. That's what this is. That's what Nietzsche is in many ways. Game theory can much better explain it than I can. But Nietzsche would say that it's applied through appeals to morality. Somebody says to you, well, be kind, be compassionate. There's nothing wrong with kind and compassion. Those are good virtues. But the way and the time at which they're applied, we've got to be very careful, because is there an ulterior motive going on here? Nietzsche would say that in many ways our animal instincts, he says that man impatiently rips himself apart, persecutes himself, gnaws at himself inwardly. He gives himself no peace and abused himself. This animal who battered himself raw on the bars of his cage and who is supposed to be tamed. Man is full of emptiness and torn apart with homesickness for the desert, and thus has to create from within himself an adventure, a torture chamber, an unsafe and hazardous wilderness. This fool, this prisoner, consumed with longing and despair, became the inventor of bad conscience. With it, the worst and most insidious illness was introduced, one from which mankind has not yet recovered: man's sickness of himself, man's sickness of man. So he basically is saying that because we've become sort of civilized as humans, walking upright and all that, what we therefore have seen is that we've had a forcible breach with our animal past. And so there occurs a declaration of war against all the old instincts of which, up until then, strength and pleasure and formidableness have been based upon. So this process, he says, is like an animal soul turning against itself. And this, in certain weak, botched individuals, he calls them the botched and weak individuals. These are basically Untermensch. They develop a kind of caste of people that he calls the Philistine. Philistine is a man who fancies himself the son of muses. So he would say that deprived of their proper outlet of action, by which he means they can't fight it out in the wilderness anymore, so they're forced to find compensation for an imaginary revenge. And this is what you ever look at social justice warriors, they're so toxic, aren't they? These are the Philistines. The Philistine in Nietzschean terms is really what in modern day parlance, I guess Edward Dutton would call the spiteful Meton, okay? This is like a kind of embryonic spiteful Meton, the Philistine. Nietzsche says that these people have an excessive secretion of bile, that we encounter in them a formidable opponent, and that they live with this kind of pure, established barbarity. They're kind of sickly, envenomed, resentful types. The Philistine, Nietzsche writes, is perpetually obsessed with the loathsome spectacle of the distorted, the dwarfed, the stunted, the botched, and the weak. You ever notice how social justice warriors always esteem the most hideous of, they wouldn't take someone like Lord Nelson. They'd take some like gross tranny, let's not even go down, some kind of disgusting furry or something. Whereas the strong man, okay, Übermensch, Nietzsche says, a strong and well-constituted man digests his experiences, his deeds and misdeeds, all included, just as he digests his meats, even when he has some tough morsels to swallow. But for the Philistine, the spiteful Meton, well, someone or other must be to blame that I feel ill. And this is a kind of conclusion Nietzsche says that's peculiar to all sick people. He means, spiritually sick. The sufferers, he says, one and all, are frighteningly willing and inventive in their pretext for painful emotions. They even enjoy being mistrustful and dwelling on wrongs and imagined slights. They rummage through the bowels of their past and present for obscure, questionable stories that will allow them to wallow in tortured suspicion and intoxicate themselves with their own poisonous wickedness. They rip open the oldest wounds and make themselves bleed to death from scars long since healed. They make evildoers out of friend, wife, child, and anyone else near to them. I suffer, therefore someone or other must be guilty of that. And every sick sheep, he says, thinks the same. The problem is when you have these kind of aesthetic shepherds who come along and say, well, yes, you're quite right, my sheep. Somebody must be to blame. Now, Nietzsche says, no, you yourself are the one with responsibility. But these Philistine types, he says that they are actually the biggest threat to a flourishing society. It's not, the biggest threat doesn't come from the strongest out there. The harm comes from the weakest. Okay, he says that cultural Philistinism is comparable to worms, which parasite on dead bodies. The fatter the dead body, the better for the parasites. So this is what we have to be very, very careful of. All right, let me have a little look at your questions. Are you still there? I am a Philistine, someone said. I hope I'm not talking to you quickly. Hey, history bro. Hey, dual citizen. Your comments crack me up, people. Hey, Scrubs. Nietzsche slept with whores and caught syphilis. It's possible that he did occasion the adult cuddle house at one time or another. We don't actually know. Although, he was very much in love with a particular woman called Lou Salome. I don't know whether they just did that sort of thing back then. Yeah, a bit of a lad. But it's possible he did have syphilis, yes. But as I say, Richard Wagner actually spread a very vicious rumor about that and published it. I shouldn't laugh, but it just goes to show how such rumors are immortalized. I guess it's like P.G. Wodehouse said, if you throw enough mud, it sticks. But it could be possible. All right, folks, so keep your questions coming in. I'm going to send you the link in Entropy again. It is, looks like it's offline, but it's, just reading some of your, yes, it's okay to be white. You are correct. Just be careful a bit what I say here. He tends to call them Jesuits, but yes, he does ascribe a certain ethnic group more than others. I don't know how much you want to get into on that. I'll leave that to your imagination. All right, so where are we? Wow, that's already been an hour. Shoot. Okay, well, I've just got a little bit more for you. I'm not going to keep you too long. But all right, what else did I want to tell you? Talked about Philistines. We've talked about, so yeah, the Philistine, full of petty envy. Okay, Nietzsche says that he has a lynx eye for the weak points in those natures to whose elevations he cannot attain. Before the man of the great current, he stands all the colder and more reserved. His eye is then like a smooth and irresponsive lake, which is no longer moved by rapture or sympathy. It all results from the instinct of mediocrity of his type, which labours instinctively for the destruction of the exceptional man, and endeavours to break, or still better, to relax every bent bow. So who do we know like this? As we said, social justice warriors. Social justice has always understood how to introduce itself as the religion of sympathy. We know, of course, that that's really it's a school of the weak and the botched, whose appeal to good nature, I think, is usually just an appeal to making concessions. It's the art of depersonalizing the spirit. What else do I have to tell you? Let me see what my notes here. So yeah, a forcible breach with his animal past. What Nietzsche wants is for us to start living back in equilibrium with the establishment of society. As we've already said, I guess like Neanderthal becoming civilized man. Can you tell I'm an anthropologist? Embarrassing, isn't it? We're now living more of a confined, unwilded space. That's a really Gardenista word, isn't it? Unwilded. And this brings with it a suspension and a devaluation of the instincts. Thus, what modernity faces us with is the prospect of an animal soul turning against itself. And as I've said, this is unnatural. It makes us sick. The external discharge of man's instincts is actually obstructed in civilized society, and we've actually failed, in Nietzsche's opinion, into any organic assimilation to our new circumstances. All of the noble instincts in man, the instinct towards success, strength, dominion, and again, I'm not talking about ruthlessness or cruelty, but instincts that help us thrive and flourish, have through a process of gradual domestication, they've been degraded and overpowered so that man now resembles a wretched and loathsome, unedifying creature, he would say. Now, this is sometimes why Nietzsche is seen as an early kind of antecedent to fascism, because he links the well-being of the future of the human race with the unconditional rule of nature's aristocracy. He thinks that we should be living in harmony with the natural order, which is really a kind of very basic, elemental premise of fascism. I'm not that well read on fascism, sadly, but he writes, for instance, that, quote, an honest natural scientist believes in the unconditional rule of natural laws in the world, without, however, taking up any position in regard to the ethical or intellectual value of these laws. Wherever neutrality is abandoned in this respect, it is owing to an anthropomorphic attitude of mind, which allows reason to exceed its proper bounds. And this natural order is called the will to power. As I said before, all is force against force and nothing more. And so says Nietzsche. So this is where some people get a bit like iffy. Oh, is he being a bit, is he being a bit fashy? Again, I doubt if you're already subscribed to my channel that you remotely care about that. I'm sure that, like me, you probably applaud it and see the value in it. Some people don't like it. Nietzsche is not asking that we start to crush others. He's asking that we start to look at arranging morality and our moral reference point. That's the word. That's the term I'm looking. That's the bugger I'm looking for. The reference point. That we start to adhere to moral reference points that are life-affirming and more complementary to the natural order. Natural order is hierarchy. It's human hierarchy. Animal hierarchy. And as I said, and this is really what Beyond Good and Evil is all about. He's saying, take stock of societal appeals, kind of like herd instincts. Yeah, you see it all the time in the press. It's good and it's right and it's noble and it's compassionate to feel sorry for immigrants crossing the channel because, oh, they're just poor, cold, and, you know, the black baby with the tears in its eyes. Nietzsche is saying, oh, there is something subversive going on here. There are these nasty Philistines are subverting their lust and hunger, their appetite for domination, which, by the way, we all have this will to power in us. But for Nietzsche, the higher type of man is the one who can overcome it, who can control it, can conquer it. The overman, that's why it's called the overman, Übermensch, okay? Somebody who has gone beyond through. You are Zarathustra. This is what he means when he says, if you stare into the abyss, it stares back into you, but only if you're a Philistine. You got to reach up, you got to be the mountain climber, okay, up on top of that glacial fresh air. And taking yourself out of that cyclic system. And the whole character of our world will then change in a really essential way. You know, it will then begin to represent life circumstances that aren't occupied always with resentment and envy and a kind of bitterness, but will be all about health and flourishing. How many things? I mean, look at our kids. Are they told? They're being told. Are they being told to go out and keep themselves fit, and or are they being told, well, it's good to embrace your flexible gender identity? You know, these are all really depraved morals subversions that are very obvious to us now. But Nietzsche's saying, oh, no, life is riddled with this stuff. And it's come through just habit, usually of the church, because we're a Christian culture. He says there are deposits and residues of that old Christian way of thinking. Now, again, I'm a Christian, and so please don't be offended if you are also a Christian. Nietzsche's just saying, can we not start? I mean, look at the Vatican. Can we not say that's been subverted? Do we feel good when we see the Pope kiss the feet of migrants? You know, and basic, or do we like it when we see that old Pope who was against communism? I can't remember his name, some Polish fella who was based and red-pilled. No, we want our priests to be based and red-pilled. Basically, this is Nietzsche's exaltation to becoming based and red, how to become based and red-pilled. And it's all, again, he is a bit of a deconstructionist. When he says, you'll have heard the expression, how to philosophize with a hammer. He's saying, you get out that metaphorical hammer and you bash the fuck out of those reference points. And some people don't like this because they go, oh, well, that's what the left do. They say, well, it's all a social construct. And Nietzsche is famous. There's a phrase of his where he said, there is no such thing as fact-only interpretation. A lot of people wince from that, myself included. He's not perfect, but he's pretty up there. But it's not about deconstructing so that there's nothing left. It's about being able to disassemble certain patterns of thought that are not helping us. They're keeping us fucking weak and depraved. It's a perversion of logic and the natural order. So Nietzsche's saying, right, just take a moment, try and reflect on all these existing, you know, systemic is actually the right word. I can't believe I'm actually advocating that now, but think about it, the way that social justice warriors deconstruct existing systems of orders and thought as being Eurocentric and white male dominated. Well, okay, think of it the other way around. The systems of thought at the moment are dominated by certain Bolshevik styles of thinking that aren't conducive for us. They're not keeping us as a higher type of cultivated man. We want to be aspiring towards high types of culture. And living in a way that allows us to be attuned with instinct, primitive instincts. Again, I'm not even saying, he's not asking us to return to animals or anything. You know, this isn't the noble savage. Nietzsche's not saying we need to return to the wild. He's saying we need to reorder society so it complements the wildness in us. It can be dispensed in ways that are healthy. And that's what Beyond Good and Evil is all about. So let me just have a look at the chat. Hey, nice ratio. Who are the 7 down votes? Is it Freud, I bet? Maybe Paul Raya, Lou Salome, David Strauss? I hope I've not been talking to you quickly. So I tell you what, I'll answer some of your questions now and then I'll wrap it up. Maybe we'll do 15 minutes more. I guess it's been a bit longer than an hour. Let me just refresh the page. If you've got any, I would love to read your questions. You're very funny, some of you. I'm just laughing at some of these. All right, let's check them out. So I've read some of those. Sensum Communum. Recently, I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks. Which work of Nietzsche would give me a general feel for his works, which would translate best to being read out aloud? Yeah, I'm actually really pro audiobook for Nietzsche, because sometimes having it read gives you like it tells you where all the lilts are, and sometimes if you're just reading it on the page, it can feel a bit like a riddle. So having someone read it is actually much better. I would really recommend Thoughts Out of Season. Is great. So also called the Untimely Meditations, but Thoughts Out of Season, I've got a great, I'll tell you what, after this, I'll pin to the comments my recommendations, if that's okay. The Genealogy is also very good, but I do like Thoughts Out of Season. There are some quite funny parts of it too. It's basically a collection of maxims and whatnot. Also Daybreak, that's another one I would suggest. Okay, hello, Mr. Red Pill Pharmacist Donald Paris, a very good friend of mine. What are your thoughts on anti-education? I found it quite enjoyable. It is a divergence from style of using aphorisms. Yeah, so that's another one of Nietzsche's sort of a long essay. I really like that text. It starts out with a few anecdotes. I think it starts out with him going hunting or accidentally not shooting someone, but nearly missing somebody when trying to shoot off a can of a rock. Oh, got the hiccups. Yeah, I really like that. I mean, I could do a whole stream on that as well. In it, there's some content about the use and abuse of history for life, how history is used as a way of degrading present life as well. I don't know. I mean, I guess I could talk to you afterwards, hopefully, Donald. Anti-Education is a great book, though. Yeah, I'm very pro it. It's quite an amusing little book, and as you say, it's a breach from aphorisms. I like some of his personal stuff. Actually, the best stuff of Nietzsche for me is his letters. They're very beautiful. They're incredibly beautifully written, really gentle. And there's this great one. I'll have to find it for you later and upload it. But it's this one where he's only a kid and he accidentally gets drunk. I think he must be 12 or 13. And the priest at his school in Shafulta basically gave him a bollocking and wrote home to his mum. So he's trying to explain it to his mum. But he was very satirical even at that age. You know, you could tell he was being a little bugger, cheeky bugger. He's very cheeky as Nietzsche, which is why I quite like him. Okay, so Bilbo says, do you know Devon Tracy regressive agenda? Our basically modern aphoristic way of describing lots of philosophy and Philistines you talk about. No, I've not heard of that before. That's awesome. I will look it up. You've given me a link. Thank you. I will. Points 11 and 12. Let me see if I can open it now. Cheeky lol. Yeah, he is a bit cheeky. He's a cheeky little monkey. Why are all these ones for? One, I'm shocked she hasn't already. Oh my god, what's it one for? Dual Citizen, lads. Dual Citizen, I hope you don't mind that I gave you a spanner without ever even asking you. I just assumed that you'd be top drawer. Yeah, I'd do some audiobooks for sure. Just having a little look. Do you lift, bro? Nietzsche, 1890. Do you know what? He was quite physically fit for someone who was so damn sick. He would go on hike. He used to hike about 8 or 9 hours a day, which, you know, non-stop is pretty good. And he was usually fasting when he did it. As a podcast you might like, I think it's just called Hiking with Nietzsche. It's a one-off philosophy one. It's not like super intense or highbrow or anything. Not that you can't cope with that, but I just mean it's not too boring. It's American philosopher or professor talking about how he tries to retrace Nietzsche's hiking. In fact, I think there's a book. Hang on, let me see. Like Hiking with Nietzsche. Sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? But Hiking with Nietzsche. Becoming Who You Are. I've not read the book. Who are we? John Carg. Yeah, it looks like quite a good little book. But he was actually, you know, he was quite the mountain climber for a man, as I say, he was so poorly. And he would often go out in the night and when he had a clear head, because he was sick so much of the time, always bedridden. So when he got these kind of bursts of clarity, which didn't last for long, he would go mad. I'm a bit like that. If I'm tired a lot of the time, if I had a little pocket of the day where I've got a bit more energy, I'm like, right, go. You got to do everything you can now, because else you'll be tired later. All right. The regressive agenda. Yeah, I'm just having a look now. You said 11 and 12. Okay, so Bilbo has very kindly sent me a list of things that Devon Tracy, is that Atheism is Unstoppable? Keek. I really miss AIU, actually. I might have to... Where does he stream again? I might have to actually get a subscription for that, because I do miss him. He made me laugh. He sent me a list. Okay, this is his regressive agenda. I guess it's a list of things that he considers to be part of... Okay, 11. Virtue signal whenever conceivably possible. How is the world supposed to know how awesome you are unless you announce it to them repeatedly? Well, of course, exactly. Fight against bullies. They are none. If there are none, pretend that there are. This will help you process your resentment towards all those mean kids. Well, resentment is a major part of Nietzsche's work, and I mean, Mr. Tracy really might be interested in, when Nietzsche talks about resentment, it's not talking about the word is actually in French ressentiment. Cringe for my pronunciation, but it's kind of like, I just looked it up now, a psychological state resulting from suppressed feelings of envy and hatred which cannot be satisfied. Now, who's an example of this? Althea Hirsch. Why do you think she wants to tear down Nelson's column? You think she really cares about slavery and blacks? No, it's because she knows that there will never be, a 100-foot statue in bronze paneling in her name. People like that feel... It sobers them into a feeling of mediocrity about themselves. And so that resentment, Nietzsche would say, it's channeled through appealing for us to act in ways that actually help dwarf us, to keep us low. I mean, I guess in conservative circles, they call paleocon circles, they call this the kind of tall poppy syndrome. You cut the poppies so they're equal. Nietzsche would say that this is a really clever little way that these Philistines use to just keep us in check, in place. Guilt is rank with it. Nietzsche talks an awful lot in the Antichrist about the use of Christian guilt. So yeah, very much about psychology. I guess it's a form of resentment and hostility. So yeah, definitely. I think old Devo. I miss him. I'm glad he's better from his. He had corona twice, didn't he? Yeah, I always liked Devon. He was a Hillary supporter, wasn't he? But I must admit, he used to have me wetting myself with laughter sometimes. All right, let me see. So I guess I could wrap up a little bit now. There's so much more, but I know it's a heavy subject, so I thought we'd start with that. If you're interested, I can do more streams. We can talk more about Nietzsche and anything you like. Übermensch, Zarathustra. Somebody mentioned earlier the eternal regression of the same. Recurrence of the same, that could take a whole nother episode on its own. So there's a more fatigue. But I think Beyond Good and Evil is a good and relevant place to start for today, because we talk about virtue signaling, don't we? I mean, Edward Dutton was talking about it this week with the guest he interviewed. Forgive me, I forget the name of the fella he was chatting with. But we know that these people don't care about goodness. Our job, though, is to start becoming far more resilient to it. I mean, some people don't like this. It's actually quite a Randian worldview. So Ayn Rand, dare I mention the Jewish socialist? I actually quite liked Atlas Shrugged, and I think there's a lot of logic to it. And I'm sure I'm going to get pilloried for that in chat. But so Atlas Shrugged, the very famous statue of the god Atlas. Is he a god? I can't remember, a demigod? I don't know. He's holding the world on his back. And the idea behind Atlas Shrugged is that he suddenly stands up and just throws it off. And that's really what I think the West needs to do. Sins of the world, be damned. We can't carry the baggage. And that's brutal for some people, but life is brutal. So there we go. All right, so let me just see, the next thing is... Okay, so I guess I can find there's someone actually knocking at my door, which is why I'm trying to be a bit quiet now. I don't know if I'm being too loud. I'll just ignore it for now. Okay, let me give you a white pill to end on, because I am very confident that everybody in my chat is an Übermensch, a Zarathustrian. If they're not yet, then they're well on their way to being so. Any final questions you want to get in? Crack them in. I love my zero. Dominic Jasinski. Man, how are there so many of you watching? That's mental. Just reading some of my nice comments. Schrodinger's cat. Good joke. All right, let's see. I'll finish with this. The fate now overhanging Europe is simply this: that it is exactly her strongest sons that come rarely and late to the springtime of their existence. That, as a rule, when they are already in their early youth, they perish saddened, disgusted, darkened in mind, just because they have already, with the entire passion of their strength, drained to the dregs the cup of disillusionment, which nowadays means the cup of knowledge, and they would not have been the strongest had they not also been the most disillusioned. For that is the test of their power. They must first of all rise out of the illness of their epoch to reach their own health. A late springtime is their mark of distinction. Also let us add late merriment, late follow, the late exuberance of joy. The souls of those few who really feel the utter ignominy of this mission and its terrible humiliation of art must be filled to the brim with sorrow and pity, but also with a new and overpowering yearning. He who would fain emancipate art and reinstall its sanctity, now desecrated, must first have freed himself from all contact with modern souls. Only as an innocent being himself can he hope to discover the innocence of art, for he must be ready to perform the stupendous tasks of self-purification and self-consecration. If he succeeded, if he were ever able to address men from out his enfranchised soul, and by means of his emancipated art, he would then find himself exposed to the greatest of dangers and involved in the most appalling of struggles. Man would prefer to tear him and his art to pieces, rather than acknowledge that he must die of shame in presence of them. It is just possible that the emancipation of art is the only ray of hope, illuminating the future, an event intended only for a few isolated souls, while the many remain satisfied to gaze into the flickering and smoking flame of their art, and can endure to do so, for they do not want to be enlightened but dazzled. They rather hate light, more particularly when it is thrown over themselves. Time and again, this is my favorite quote, by the way. Time and again, some awaken, who, seeing what is great, feel inspired, as if human life were a glorious thing, and as if the most beautiful fruit of this bitter plant were the assurance they need. Sorry. Oh, my screen's frozen. With the assurance that someone once walked proudly. Oh, I've botched that fucking totally, haven't I? Bugger! Right, let me try again. Time and again, some awaken, who, seeing what is great, feel inspired, as if human life were a glorious thing, and as if the most beautiful fruit of this bitter plant were the assurance that someone once walked proudly and stoically through this existence. The wall of their self-sufficiency must be hard as diamond, not to be shattered and destroyed. For everything is on the move against them. All around him waves of delusion and distortion crash onto the fortress of his pride. He turns away in disgust. On the mountains of truth you can never climb in vain. Either you will reach a point higher up today, or you will be training your powers so that you will be able to climb higher tomorrow. So hopefully that's a bit of a white pill to leave you on. I hope I've given you a little bit of an introduction. Just looking at some of these. Thank you for all the likes. You're absolute sugar plums. Thank you for all the donations. Lots of you just haven't asked questions, but just donated. That's very kind. You're witchier than ever today. Spellbinding. This topic rocks. Do more Nietzsche. Thank you, Peter, my friend. Very great. I remember you from a former stream. Hello, my friend. Witchier. I like being witching. That's quite cool. The Witcher. Yeah, we can do more Nietzsche. I'll tell you what, I'll probably wrap it up for now. But if you like that, I mean, I'd love to do this again. You know, anything that you're into. I had someone email me this morning with a bunch of things. I mean, I could talk about this all day. But I mostly wanted to kind of just give you a bit of an entry into him, because he can be a bit of a bugger for getting into. He's but when you have it in mind that, okay, what we've got of his, it's fragments. There's nothing comprehensive or coherent, actually, when you string them all together. You got to take the fragments and then kind of abstractly put it together yourself. Now that works for me because I'm a scatterbrain. I've got quite a, my brain is all over the place. If you're someone like me, Nietzsche works. Kant is much harder for me, probably because he's coherent. I don't know though. So I hope that's brought you a little bit into it. And hey, I'll tell you this. This is a cool piece of trivia about Nietzsche. I forgot. He actually had a dueling scar. Hang on, where's the quote? It's great. So he was part of a fraternity, as they had back in the day, fencing. And where is it? His dueling scar. They called them bragging scars back in the. I don't know if they still have these fraternities. Probably not. But he if you look, you can rarely see it. But some photos, if you look very closely, on the bridge of his nose, he had a scar. And so this was from a university rival, and this is how he got it. This is in his youth. He was at some function, philosophy chat, or some evening dinner or something, talking very politely with this another young gentleman. But of course, all the young men wanted a bragging scar because it's kind of hot. It's like, the girls quite fancy a guy with the scar on his cheek. It shows that you've been in a battle, like having like a shark bite or something. He said, talking to this other lad, "We had a very animated conversation about all things artistic and literary. And when we were saying goodbye, I asked him in the politest of terms to duel with me." And so he described the fight as thus: "It scarcely lasted 3 minutes, and Nietzsche's opponent managed to cut a low cut at the bridge of his nose, hitting the exact spot where his spectacles, pressing down too heavily, had left a red mark. Within 2 or 3 days, our hero had recovered, except for a small slanting scar across the bridge of his nose, which remained there throughout his life, and did not look at all bad on him." I really like the old bragging scar history. It's kind of cool, isn't it? My dad was in one of those, much because the scars were called schmies. That's right, or Bruderschmies. Is that right? Let me hang on. Bragging scar. I like this old kind of fraternity thing. I mean, I wouldn't, obviously, as a woman, it would be a man's thing, but I can understand probably why they liked the energy of it. I don't know whether Germany seems to be, they used to call them gymnasiums or gymnasiums, didn't they? I don't know if they are still, hang on, upper class Austrians and Germans involved in academic fencing. Mensch scars, or the bragging scar, or Schmiede. That's kind of cool, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. It feels like a very European thing, that Heidelberg, Bonn, Jena, facial scars. Didn't Lord Heehaw have one? The practice of dueling and the associated scars. Yeah, there's some very good and very funny stories about these, actually. Could do a whole blimmin' thing on that. I'd like to know if anyone knows of somebody who's got an actual bragging scar, though. I hereby entreat anyone in chat to a friendly duel. I once lost a toenail. Does that count? Yeah, it does. I stubbed a toe before. Chess boxing, what's that? Yeah, I guess being attacked by a goat. Yeah, it's quite impressive. They're quite rough goats, aren't they? Just reading some of your comments. Oh, he never attacked the horse. Okay, so what happens is he before Nietzsche had his final kind of collapse into real madness, as they say, and it really was a madness. He was a few beads shy of a rosary, as my grandmother used to say. And he saw a horse being whipped outside his bedroom window. I think this was in Italy. And it really upset him, it hurt him. So he ran out and flung his arms around it. And then he had this kind of manic fit. I think Georg Lichtenberg writes about it in one of his books. There's some famous account somewhere. And then that's when he kind of became palsied and poorly and never recovered. I think the horse is okay, though. Actually, there's a really cool art house film. This is so middle class of me and super pretentious. It's called The Turin Horse. I think that's just what the film's called. Hang on, let me have a look. Who's the director? It's so dark and grim, but I freaking love it. I love that kind of dark stuff. Turin Horse by Torino, by Hungarian Bellatar. That's it, Bellatar. I'm not really into, like, I'm not a big movie buff, or film buff, sorry, not movie. But that's actually quite a good film. Actually, I'll tell you what, something I watched recently is called The White Ribbon, Das Weiße Band. Has anyone seen that? That's another kind of dark film I would recommend. Yeah, the horsewhipping scene in Crime and Punishment and Dostoevsky. Hurts, doesn't it? Hurts to read about that. Conan the Barbarian knocked out a camel. Did he? That's quite funny. Red or white vino, Albion? White, probably. Do scars made with tools count? Yeah, I think so. I'm a hot Arab with a scar from my battles in a scorching desert, certainly not a shaving nick. Are you tuning in, are you, from all the way over there, from the desert? Good to hear it. Yeah, Nietzsche did say that Kant was an idiot. Nietzsche says some awful things about other people, particularly David Strauss, who he was convinced had a stroke and died because of Nietzsche's bad review of Strauss's book. And I think there's probably a lot of evidence for that, because it was rough what he said. He absolutely owned him, as the kids say. And the guy died within like a week of this review, bless him. Anyway, yeah, so I guess I can wrap it up there. I hope I've given you an insight into Beyond Good and Evil and you can understand it a bit better. Obviously, there are so many. Oh, cool. I'm glad you purchased Thoughts Out of Season, Sense and Communion. That's awesome. It's always nice to see you in chat. I see your name come up a lot, but that's fantastic. Let me know. Let me know how you get on. Most interesting. Hey, Duke, how's it going, man? I have to get back on at some point, have a chit chat about something. Audiobooks, thank you. Yep, Jewel, I will do that. All right. Okay, well, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. John McFlippity-Flop says, I believe Nietzsche's ideas on morality is pretty flawed, almost leftist. Do you think? In what way do you think they're leftist? I mean, do you think that the standard of morality we have now is, I mean, do you think it's desirable? I mean, yeah, you have to tell me a bit more about what you think. Maybe you can wing me an email or something. Just looking at some of your comments. Man, you've all got a great sense of humor. Well, thank you very much for your questions this evening. As I say, a lot of you have asked, you've not asked questions, just sent donations, so that's very kind. But, you know, any questions you have, you can send to me. I like talking about this kind of thing. Tolerance and apathy are my morals, George. You are an Untermensch, George. It's okay. There's potential to change. You think Nietzsche's a leftist? I don't think he was a leftist. I don't know if he was necessarily a right-winger either. He was his own breed of Zarathustra, I think. Anyhow, all right, chickens. I don't know how you read audiobooks, but if anyone's got a contact, hit me up. Because that sounds like easy work. Don't have to leave the house. All right, my chickadees, I'm going to leave you there. What are the best anthologies of Nietzsche's works? All right, I'll tell you what, I'll pin a few bits and pieces after the stream in the comments for the best versions to read, if that's okay. Don't know what you mean by anthology necessarily, but I didn't call him a beta, did I? I didn't use that word. All right then, folks. Hey, nice one. It's nice to have so much of you watching. I don't know. I mean, I can do another stream, I don't know, next week, maybe next Sunday if you like. Let me know what you think. All right. Take care. I'm going to end the stream. And thank you to my sweet mods. And you're all beautiful and lovely. Is Antiques Roadshow on at the moment? Because that's a very Sunday thing. You know, Sunday's a bit weird. No church in the morning, obviously, to go out. I feel like Sunday night is kind of last of the summer wine and Antiques Roadshow. Do you know what I mean? All right, okay, well, we can talk next Sunday. Oh, someone said this is going to be regular. Well, look, I was going to start this stream with King Lear, but I'm afraid that month has passed now because it was in tune with the publication date of King Lear, and I made a posh video for it and everything, but I never got round to it. I can't remember. I think I had a migraine, which is a very untermensch thing to have occurred, but I've got a long way to becoming a mensch, I'm afraid. Überwensch, you could say. Yes, I mean, maybe it will be a regular thing. I kind of don't want to assume anyone's that interested, but sometimes it's nice to have something to listen to on a Sunday. I often find I'm struggling to, in the day, I mean. So, all right then. Stop arguing in chat. Überwensch, lol. Scrubs on tour. All right, Sub Ronnie. Over and out, chickens. Be good. Bye.